Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. Lessons learned from Equifax plus your best defense for the next cyber attack. Hint, passwords. With faculty fellow and industry recognized security expert, Dr. Eric Cole. You're also joined by Beyond Trust product manager, Martin Kennard, who will run us through a Beyond Trust overview and demo if we have time towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions for Eric or for Martin via the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar. We'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now. So at this point, let's hand it on over to Eric, who will jump right in. Eric, welcome to the line, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. It's always a pleasure. I am joining you live from New York City. I had a few TV interviews this morning, and I tell you, when I was walking back to my hotel to get ready for this webinar, I was sort of thinking about the last 30 years, and it's sort of, to me, amazing how the field of cybersecurity has evolved. 30 years ago, if I went to a cocktail party and somebody said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I do cybersecurity." They sort of give you a weird look. They like take their children. You're like that weird, smelly guy, right, that nobody wants to hang out with. Today, you're like the coolest person out there. I go to the party last night, and they're like, "What do you do?" "Cybersecurity." It's like, whoa, that's the coolest job out there. Now, the good part is people are recognizing cybersecurity. The bad part is it's for the wrong reasons, right? It's because of all those compromises out there. And of course, the latest, and of course not the last, unfortunately, is our good old Equifax. So we get to pick on them. But don't worry, Equifax. In another month, there'll be somebody else to pick on, right? So it's just sort of the next flavor to go after. But it's sort of interesting because back in the 90s, when I worked at the CIA, we did a lot of industry outreach where we would go out to executives and companies and try to make them aware of cybersecurity. And I remember back in the 90s, the number one question I would always get is, "Okay, Eric, this stuff sounds cool. It almost sounds like science fiction, but can you give me some real examples? Can you give me actual companies that are making these mistakes, getting targeted, and having major, major exposure?" And I used to say, "Well, no, because it's classified. We can't talk about it." And I remember so frustrated walking out of those meetings saying, "I wish we had some cases to talk about. I wish we had some public breaches available." Be careful what you wish for, right? Because today, I walk out of the interview this morning and I said, "I wish we didn't have so many breaches, and I wish we didn't have so many compromises out there." So it's just to the point where this problem is getting worse and worse, and we're getting tolerant. I remember a time and place, not that long ago, that if you woke up and heard that 1 million records were compromised, that would freak you out. Today, you hear like 100 million, and you're like, "Oh, not a big deal." And oh, by the way, we have not been done with Equifax. When Equifax first broke, and they originally said around 50 million, and I told everyone it's much larger, and then a few weeks later it was 80 million, and then a week ago they said 120 million. Mark my words, it will be over 200 million before all is said and done. It's just they don't understand the scope of damage, and this is always typical. The number one thing that always happens with a breach is it's underreported because they don't truly grasp the big intent of the damage. Now, you always want to be careful of what you say because things can and will be used against you. So I was one of the first folks that started a few years ago with my book, The Advanced Persistent Threat, and sort of telling folks, listen, you won't be able to prevent all attacks. If you have any functionality at all, 100% security does not exist. Because 100% security means zero functionality. And what I always tell folks, and I always get this on the interviews, is, "So Eric, how can somebody be secure? How can somebody be 100% secure online?" And it's actually easy. And the easy solution is go Amish, right? Give up your computers, give up your electronics, give up your electricity. But here's the funny part. That is not even true today because the Amish got screwed with Equifax. Right? The Amish have Social Security numbers. The Amish folks filed taxes, and the Amish information was stored in Equifax database. So we now even live in a time and place in 2017 where we can't even go Amish, right? That's still not going to protect us, and that information is still going to be exposed. But I've always told people you're going to get compromised. No matter what you do, no matter what you put in place, attacks are going to happen. And I always go, but don't get upset, because it's really no different than everyday life. Is there anyone? Now, anyone, of course, Martin, because Martin is, you'll see in a minute when he gets to do his part, he's superhuman. But other than Martin, is there anyone else who is the perfect specimen of a human? Is there anyone listening to this webcast that they are 100% healthy and they honestly believe they will never, ever get sick? If you do, just type it in the question. Just let us know if that person's out there. But you're all probably laughing. 100% health doesn't exist. Every single one of us knows, no matter what we do, we are going to get sick. Then question, why do we take vitamins? Why do we eat healthy? Why do we exercise? It's not so we never get sick. It's to minimize the frequency in which we get sick and the impact it has on our lives. That's our focus. The reason why we do all those things is to minimize frequency and impact. And that's how we have to look at security. Compromises are going to occur, but we need to focus on minimizing the frequency in which they occur and the impact it has on our lives. Now, here's the problem. You now have companies that go, cool, we have an excuse. We can say that you are going to get compromised. Dr. Cole said it, so we don't have to do anything. We can just ignore basic components. We don't have to keep our systems up to date. And then when a compromise occurs, we can go, well, there was nothing we could do about it anyway. And that is just dead wrong. Going in and saying when an attack occurs, well, there was nothing we could do about it, is about the most galactically stupidest thing I've ever heard. So what we have to be careful today, thanks to Equifax and a few others, is we can't go in and say because we failed to implement proper security that that's an excuse, that we could not have done anything about it. Yes, there are some cases where no matter what you do, you are going to get compromised. Equifax wasn't one of those cases. Equifax is one of those cases in which if you focused in on the right areas, you could have prevented and stopped this specific attack. And this is especially frustrating because for most people, there wasn't anything you could do. Now, if you go in and you have an account with Yahoo and Yahoo gets compromised again and again, right? Now, some people don't like when I say this, right? But I'm just being honest with you. You technically had some control. You set up the Yahoo account. You set up those credentials. So like I said, some people get mad at me, but I'm a believer in you always accept 100% responsibility. That's just my philosophy in life is you want to be successful, you want to be happy, always accept 100% responsibility. Not everyone agrees with me, but is what it is. So in that case, you could say, okay, I did something. I created an account with Yahoo. I created an account with the bag. There was some actionable thing that I did to be aware that my data was there. With Equifax, you had no control. The government decided that this was a good thing, that your data was there. So that's sort of what makes this one a little more on the frustrating side because you got exposed and many people did not even realize their information was there. Now, I don't want to go too much off on Equifax. That's a whole nother hour presentation. I want to get back to what we could do to fix it. But because I care about you, and hopefully you've all done it, but one of the things I've been doing for 10 years, freeze your credit. Why are you allowing anybody to open up credit in your name without your awareness? So that's something I've always done, and now it's come to the forefront. Now, just so we're clear, freezing the credit doesn't take away the fact that your Social Security number has been compromised, but it does minimize the overall damage that can be caused. So first and foremost, if you want to be secure, and it sounds simple, but you need to go in and make sure any system visible from the internet does not contain sensitive data. It's that simple. I mean, we can step back and sit there and ask the most fundamental question of all is, what in the world was a server accessible from the internet with known vulnerabilities? And even if we take that part out, even if we say that they maintained it, they patched it, they did everything correctly, which they didn't, but let's just assume they did, my still fundamental question is, why in the world was there a server accessible from the internet that had access to hundreds of millions of records? That's the question you need to ask yourself. How in the world did that happen? How in the world was that allowed? So from your perspective, whether you're running a company or working in security, that's really the question. You should have a list of all the servers that are visible from the internet and verify that none of them contain sensitive data. That's a simple trick. That's what I specialize in, taking these very, very complex topics and breaking them down to what are the fundamental pieces you really need to focus on. Now, let's go in and talk about hacking. I'm going to teach you how to hack. Now, I'll warn you, it's a little anticlimactic. It's not as exciting as you might think, but let's just break it down. And let's start simple. As I told you, I'm in New York City in a hotel. What if I told you my room is filled with gold? It's not, so please don't come after me, but let's say it is filled with gold, and you wanted to rob my hotel room. How would you do it? What would be the information that you would need? Well, what's the first thing? You would need my hotel that I'm staying at. You would need the name of the hotel that I'm staying, so you need the address. What's the second thing you would need? My room number. You would need to know what room I'm staying at. And then what's the third thing? You would need a way to get into my room. You would need some vulnerability, some weakness, some way to exploit or bypass the lock to get into my room. That's it. That's hacking. So let's just convert that over to cyber. If you want to hack a system on the internet, you need to have a visible server, a server that's directly accessible from the internet. And but by the way, there's many tools out there like HPing and others. I'm just showing you these tools are readily available. Right? Very simple, very straightforward. By the way, warning, warning, warning. Even though this might seem straightforward on a single slide, these tools actually do work, and these tools could be used to break into a system. Warning, if you use these tools without permission or perform this activity without permission, you are committing crime. You are breaking the law, and you can get in a lot of trouble. So I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just showing you the straightforward nature in which this could occur. There are public free tools out there that you could, if you wanted to live a life of evil, could utilize. So HPing 2 or HPing 3, you go in and you find the visible IPs. Then the room numbers are the ports. Those are just listening points for the services, and we use a tool like Nmap. So now basically with steps 1 and 2, I know the hotel and I know what rooms different people are staying at that hotel. So now I need to find a weakness. Now, normally one of these exists, but because with Equifax, in my opinion, they're overachievers, so they actually did both of these, right? So kudos to them, right? One is you can go in and look for a known vulnerability. As we all know, any operating system, no matter how much testing and verification is done, is going to have vulnerabilities. And the way the vendor fixes those vulnerabilities is by releasing patches. A patch is basically a known exploit. A patch is basically the vendor telling the world, yo, we found the weakness if you want to exploit this break-in, which means if you don't apply the patch, you're vulnerable. And there are tools like Metasploit that have exploits for these patches that if they're not applied, you can break in. So you can go in and utilize a tool like Metasploit to find that exposure or vulnerability. Or if you want to break credentials, you could use a tool like Hydra to go in and compromise the password. Now, I tell you, if having a critical system, missing patches for several months, if that's not bad enough, having a user ID of admin and a password of admin, are you freaking kidding me? I mean, I'm reading this thing going, okay, it has to be April 1st, right? It has to be April Fool's Day. There's no possible way a company in the year 2017 can have a server with sensitive data with a user ID of admin and a password of admin. I mean, you just sort of sit there and go, seriously? I mean, come on. And then you extract the data off the server. Now, this part of the story has not come out yet, and it boggled my mind that it hasn't, and I apologize. Maybe it has. I've been going like crazy. I was in Saudi Arabia. I was in trial. I'm back in New York, so I might have missed that a little bit, but I don't think it has come out yet. But here's really, no pun intended, the million-dollar question. And the million-dollar question is this. Even if they got to the server, they got into the server, and they got access to the data, based on the sensitivity of the data and the laws and regulations that are out there, shouldn't that data have been encrypted? It would absolutely have been encrypted. Now, the only possible way they could have got that information that quickly from an encrypted database is what happened in all the other cases. So if you look at all the other breaches over the last 3 years, they basically stored the crypto key, plain text, with the data. Now, there's many variants of this. It could have been on the server plain text. It could have been in the log files. It could have been in the configuration file. But that's sort of the only possible way that could have happened. So it really needs one of two things. They either didn't encrypt the data, which I doubted, or they encrypted the data, but they didn't protect and secure those keys. Now, here's the crazy part. I am convinced when we go to cyber, we lose all common sense. Things we would never do in the real world, we go in cyber and we just do the stupidest things. Right? One of my favorite is, if you were walking down the street and a car pulled up with a stranger in it, and the stranger started talking to you and asking for personal information, what would you do? You would all go in and scream or run. Right? My 12-year-old, she's awesome. I have 3 kids. She has a sense of humor. So they teach her in school that if somebody comes up to you or tries talking to you and you don't know who they are, you're supposed to scream, stranger danger, stranger danger. So she thinks it's funny that when I go to pick her up from school and I walk in to give her a hug, in the middle of school, in front of all the administration, she will scream, stranger danger, stranger danger. And she thinks this is hysterical. I'm like, honey, Daddy's going to get arrested, right? That's not a funny thing to do, right? But she sort of thinks it is. But we would never do that. None of us, even my 12-year-olds, none of us would talk and give information out to a stranger. What do you think social media is? You are basically talking to strangers. If you look at all your different social media platforms, there is no authentication. When you go online to any social media and you are talking with Eric Cole, you have no clue who that is. Anybody can set up a profile for Eric Cole. Anybody can set up a profile for anybody. There is no validation. You are, in essence, talking to strangers. But guess what? That's socially acceptable. We as parents will socially allow our children to talk to random strangers on the internet, but we will not let them talk to strangers in real life. What's going on here, right? Sorry, I get on my soapbox because protecting our children is an effort that's near and dear to my heart. But just wanted to show how we lose this common sense. Let me give another one that's actually related to number 5. What if I told you I'm always staying in hotels and I'm always locking my key in my hotel room? I'm always losing my key. So I have a brilliant idea. And by the way, when I say brilliant like that, it means excessive sarcasm. It's not brilliant, but play along. So here's my idea. I'm going to tape the key to the outside of the door. Now, whenever I come back, the key is always there. So I come back to my room, I take the key and lock it, tape it back to the outside of the door. Then I leave again, I come back, the key's taped right there. It's always there and always accessible. Now, some of you are probably laughing or rolling your eyes and going, seriously, dude, why would you do that? That doesn't accomplish anything. Because if the key is taped to the outside of the door, anybody who gets to the door can get the key and get in. It defeats the purpose. Now your laughter is going to turn to tears. That's what companies are doing with crypto. They're storing the keys with the data. That's taping the key to the outside of the door. Once again, we would never, ever do that in real life, but somehow in cyber, we think it's okay. We think it's fine to do. So when we're looking at these recent breaches, now don't get me wrong, there could be some really advanced attacks that no matter what you do, the adversary gets in. But as I mentioned, this is not one of those. If they would not have stored sensitive data on internet-facing systems, this would not have happened. If they would have applied patches in a timely manner, this would not have happened. If they would have had robust passwords, this would not have happened. And if they properly protected the cryptographic keys, this would not have happened. And here's the kicker. They only had to do one of those. They did not have to do all of them, just one of those in place. So just sort of wanted to set that stage. Now, what is the typical response when a breach occurs? You write a check. I often hear folks go, the best thing that ever happened was we had a breach. Now, that's usually for anybody but the CISO. Why? Because what normally happens? The CISO after a breach gets fired. Now, for those of us that work in security, the coolest thing is happening. It started with Target, and it now continued with Equifax. And the coolest thing is this. When a breach occurs, not only does the CISO get fired, but the CEO also gets replaced by the board of directors. Board of directors are holding the CEO responsible for proper security. And based on the scope of damage, they are saying they should have had more awareness. Now, in the case of Equifax, there was a few other things going on there, but the bottom line is it happened. So here's the cool part. Every one of your executives, when they wake up in the morning, they look in the mirror and they go, today could be the day I die. Because if you look at Target and Equifax, prior to the breach, these were successful execs. They were doing a good job. There wasn't any intent to replace or get rid of them. It wasn't like they were doing bad. And the breach happens and bye-bye. So that now has raised the level of security to a point where every CEO is thinking about it on a daily basis because it could be the one thing that takes them from employed to unemployed. It could be the one thing that takes them from successful to unsuccessful. So this is something that is good for us because we now have an opportunity to have a voice at the table. We now have an opportunity to communicate and get the resources we need. Now, don't make the biggest mistake. Money doesn't buy you love, and money doesn't buy you security. The problem in these cases, and I hear it all the time when I do different expert witness work, is the defenses of the company was, well, we spent $60 million on security a year, therefore it's not our fault. Therefore, we shouldn't be blamed because we spent $60 million. But if you spent it on the wrong areas, that's not going to help. The fundamental problem in all of my analysis and in my opinion is not having enough resources, not having enough people. Let's take a quick look. In every one of these breaches, these companies had security devices that detected the attack. They did. What's the problem? It was one of many devices that was generating hundreds of thousands of alerts a day. These companies only had enough people to monitor 5,000. So let me ask you a question. If your security devices are sending off 100,000 alerts and your team only has enough time to go through 5,000, you're going to lose, because the probability of finding that proverbial needle in the haystack is going to be very, very low. So check this out. The reason the breach occurred is you had too many devices sending off alerts and not enough people. So what is the executive solution? Give them more money so they buy more technology to generate even more alerts to spread your resources even thinner. So in my opinion, in most cases, the worst thing you could do after a breach is throw money at the problem, because you're basically making the problem worse. What you need to do is make sure you have enough resources and make sure your devices are configured correctly. If you're getting so many alerts that you can't see the good through the bad, the true positives through the false positives, those devices are really doing you more of a disservice than they are a service. So you really want to make sure you're limiting the alerts to the critical ones, and make sure any alerts that are generated are really focused in on the important items. Now, question. What is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? And I was just over in Saudi Arabia doing some executive awareness, and the initial response from the execs were, there is no difference. There actually is. There are situations where you have a breach and you say, I'll deal with it tomorrow. And you'll have other situations where you have a breach and you say, I am going to be at work for the next 3 days dealing with it. What's the difference? The difference is the amount of data that was compromised, the impact to your organization. Question, would Equifax have been in the news if there was only 500 records stolen? No! Nobody cares about 500 records. Now, yes, if you're one of the 500, you care, but as a population, right, we don't. But when you start adding zeros and you start getting to 50 and 100 million, then it becomes newsworthy. So the thing to remember is companies are not in the news because they had a breach. They're in the news because they failed to contain and control the damage. It's all about the damage. It's all about the data. So what is the critical data? What is that critical information? Who has access to it? And how are we protecting, controlling, and managing access to that information? So what we really get down to that cornerstone is all about access to the data. And I know for those who have worked in security for a while, we've sort of always had this issue with passwords and authentication as a problem. And the funny thing is, based on the technology we're using, it's actually getting more important, not less. Why? With all the cloud-based services. Now, I believe everyone on this call knows what cloud is, but if not, just humor me, because I know we have a wide range. I love these webinars with Beyond Trust, because we get executives, we get CFOs, we get techie geeks, we get sort of the whole range of folks on here, which is awesome. So I'll make it simple. Cloud is basically, instead of having servers on-prem in your data center, they're out on the internet. So you're basically, with the cloud, you're accessing resources over the internet, which essentially means you've shifted the security to that adversary, to the cloud provider, not the adversary. Good job, Eric. To the cloud provider. But now the whole means of protecting and controlling access is user ID and password. So all of a sudden now our user ID and passwords become very, very critical because in many cases they are the first and last line of defense. Now, a couple things. First, make sure you have different passwords for different systems. One of my big pieces of advice, and I got my new book. You can pre-order it on Amazon, Online Danger. It's freaking awesome. Well, I haven't read it. I hate my books. I never read them, but people have told me it's pretty good. So Online Danger, we're going in and talking about security for the masses. And the whole premise of security today is controlling the damage. How do you control and limit the damage? Now, if you can stop an attack, that's great, but controlling and limiting the damage is how you start winning. If you have the same password every single one of your systems and the adversary breaks it, game over, because now they can get into all your systems. And let me help you out here. Adversaries are a lot smarter, faster, and quicker than most people give them credit for. They are monitoring services. They know all your accounts, and if they can go in and get one password, they can use it across the system. If you don't believe me, have you ever seen cases where you go to Amazon to buy something, and the next day you get an email that looks like it came from Amazon saying, we had trouble processing your credit card. Unless you check your order will be delayed. And most people go, oh, I ordered something yesterday. If the email comes in, they click on it. It's a fish. They get infected, and they're compromised. The adversary knew that you bought something, and that's why they sent that. Same thing with banking transactions and other stuff. You have no idea of how much monitoring and visibility they have. So if you have these same passwords for all of your systems and they break it, they will now have access to everything. Reduce your exposure. Go in and have different passwords for different systems. Now, I know a lot of folks go, oh, but Eric, there's no way I can remember it. And I agree with you if you think password. To me, the idea of a password is problematic at best. Because think about it. If you pick something that's easy to remember, the adversary can guess it. So what's easy for you is easy for the adversary. If you want to make it hard for the adversary, then it has to be hard for you. And what do people do? They write it down. So the trick is, don't think password, think passphrase. What if I went in and I told you that I had a password of capital M, the number 1, SWB, the @ symbol, uppercase F, uppercase H, the @ symbol, 11. Now you look at that going, okay, letters, numbers, special, intermix. There's no way he's going to remember that. I will never forget that. My first son was born at Fairfax Hospital at 11 o'clock. You take the first letter of each of those words, and you now get a very complex password. So the trick is passphrase, not password is how you win. Now, yes, passwords are something you know. Having tokens like something you have, and using biometrics something you are, those are great, and those are slowly being rolled out, but they're not going to be rolled out nearly quick or fast enough to meet our needs, which means passwords are going to be around for a while. So you want to make sure a little checklist for managing access is you want to know who has the accounts, what access do they need, keep that access up to date, make sure you're monitoring and looking for unauthorized access, and then remove the access when that person leaves the organization. So I want to spend a little time sort of setting the stage of how adversaries break in, show that ultimately the thing that you control and one of the biggest weaknesses is going to be your password. And one of the things I love of doing these webcasts with Beyond Trust is not only are we giving you the problem and high-level solution, but we're going to actually give you a real product that can actually do this. So I'd like to turn it over to a colleague, and a good friend of mine, Martin, who's now going to go in and show you how Beyond Trust can help you get better visibility, get better insight, and control and manage those passwords to keep you, your employees, and your organization safe. So Martin, take it away.
Perfect. Really appreciate it, Eric, and a great presentation. Absolutely loves, the analogies. Makes it very, very clear, just really how real this problem is and how people just don't think of these sorts of things. They think, yeah, I've got it encrypted, but oh yeah, by the way, I've actually got my my encryption key actually stored in the same, on the same server. So one of the things I want to show you, hopefully you can see my screen now, is taking you through a solution that's going to really help you to manage access to credentials, because ultimately what you want to do is you need to have some sort of workflow. You need to make sure that users are able to access resources to which they're entitled to access. You want to make sure it's audited, and you want to make sure that once they've finished with those credentials, that they don't have access to them anymore. So you basically, you make it job related, you make it time limited, and you audit what's going on. So in terms of password safe, as the title would suggest, it's all around password management, but it's not just passwords. You can gain access to identities in a number of different ways. So, SSH keys, for example, is something that a lot of Unix, Linux administrators will set up because it's convenient. I set up a public-private key pair. I can insert, my key into the scripts, and then I can go out and run bulk operations on thousands or tens of thousands of servers, just with this one script. Now, the downside is that makes it very convenient for the administrator, but also you're now in a situation where, obviously you have a lot of potential, sort of damage. If somebody compromises that key, now you're multiplying that by, potentially 10,000. So it's all around sort of damage limitation. And when you look at sort of password management and PAM in general, privileged account management, it's about limiting, the scope of what users can do. It's making sure that, that there's no stone left unturned. You're as strong as your weakest link. That includes, things like A2A. Where's my mouse gone? Let me go. It's here somewhere. Active. So, basically, there's a lot of organizations that actually embed passwords into scripts, again, because it's convenient. They think of more the business impact. My script has to run because now, I have my my online store, my marketplace. Customers need to be able to visit my website. But ultimately, those are attack vectors. Same with services. Windows services, scheduled tasks. There we are. Get the right term out. Those are also areas where people tend to hard code passwords. Because again, sometimes, if you look at organizations, especially large organizations, managing credentials on scale sucks. It takes a long time. You've got to update 10,000 servers with a password. You know what? You're not going to do that every 30 days, because it's obviously, very time intensive. So this is really where this type of system comes into play. It's making sure that all of those access points, all of those credentials are regularly rotated, and they are accessible only to people that are authorized to access them for specific purposes and for specific periods of time. Now, session management. So ultimately, session management is the ability to say you never have to give a password out, which seems, crazy for a password system. You think that, that's what you're doing. You're storing a password, you're releasing it. But ultimately, what its job is doing is rotating the passwords at the back end in order to make things secure, but it's also making sure that it's able to log users onto what they need to be able to log on to without ever revealing the password. And that's really the best scenario out there. And for that very reason, we include session management with the product. It's free of charge. It's, part and parcel of, of our use case. So ultimately, whether it's an operating system, a database platform like a DBMS, it could be a web page, hypervisor, whatever, router firewall, whatever you need to access, we got the ability to be able to play in those managed credentials. Now, when we actually look at the way we do it, we use what we call credential injection. Now, it's kind of a fancy name we made up, but ultimately what it means is that the credentials that you're storing and the host name and everything doesn't come down to the client. Because when you think about it, like Eric said, I mean, there's plenty of ways, plenty of tools out there that allow you to be able to crawl through the memory of a system and then look for things like hashes, leftover artifacts, that might be around that might give a hint to what a user, an administrator, has been accessing. So of course, if their laptop or the desktop becomes compromised, or an attacker comes in and maybe installs malware on a server, key logging, that sort of thing. This is, but ultimately where we get issues. So the way that it works is a user says, okay, I need access to, this resource. Now it could be in, an enclave, security zone, whatever it is. I mean, some resources squirreled away, maybe a PCI environment. Now, what PasswordSafe does is it says, okay, yep, all right, you're authorized to be able to do this. I'm going to instruct the proxy to generate a session key. So that's then sent down to the desktop. Now, bear in mind, it's just one string. It's a GUID, basically numbers and letters, and that's all it is. There's no username. There's no password. There's no host name. There's nothing that relates anything to what that user is trying to access. There's nothing in that key or any other metadata that's sent down that suggests what it is. And what happens then is, depending if it's RDP or SSH, you will instruct your client to automatically log on. And again, this can be automated. So, for example, in the case of RDP, it will automatically launch an RDP session, connects you through to the proxy. The proxy says, okay, yeah, I know which session this is, and it then inserts the credentials, hence the credential injection. Now, it inserts it on the inside. So that means that, all of those credentials, the user never gets to see. It's never on the outside of a network. All you're doing is you're just basically passing all that information for the proxy. Now, obviously, this is very secure. And a lot of people say, well, okay, well, this is great, but okay, well, is it a single point of failure? It's incredibly scalable. We have customers running thousands of, concurrent sessions through these proxies. You can have multiple systems there. It's all appliance-based, sort of virtual, physical. We also have appliances for like AWS, Google, as well as like Azure. So, ultimately it's something which is easy to deploy, is very scalable, but the bottom line is it stops the users from interacting with the credentials. Now, obviously, there's, use cases where people do need credentials. So I might be, using a crash cart in a data center, and I need to have the administrator password to log on to a console. Well, you know what, those are quite valid, use cases where you might want to do it. But ultimately, the best practice is never give out credentials if you can help it. So, what we're also doing is, when we record the information, is we're not just doing a video recording, we're recording everything the user does in the session. So whether they, left click, they right click, they selected this particular option, they clicked on this window, everything they typed. Obviously, in the case of SSH, everything they saw as well. We're sort of indexing standard in and standard out. So that way, if, let's say, for example, an admin looks at a file, they find a credit card number, and that credit card has been compromised, you can search across all of your sessions for that credit card number, find out the exact sessions where somebody viewed that information, and actually drill down not only to, obviously the fact they viewed it, but what were they doing before and afterwards? I mean, is this a layered attack? Are they doing a number of different things? Did they, is this what they were targeting? Did they just, happen across it by accident, and just, think they were going to leverage? So it allows you to be able to do some forensics. But the important thing is, it's very, very quick. So the other thing as well that that we do is we actually provide something called adaptive workflow control, and it's essentially the ability to limit access to users based upon obviously who they are, the day, which are quite normal things, the time, but we also add things like the date. So there's a full calendar. So you can say, yep, okay, I got these contractors, they need to access these particular systems from October 1st to October 25th. So you can basically set a policy up that will start and end within a particular date range. You can also set up IP address ranges as well, even, setting up complicated ranges with exclusions, that ultimately says, for a user to be able to access these accounts, they've got to be coming from this location. So if I'm an admin, and I'm a network admin, I'm logging in from the corporate network, I got access to all of these accounts. If I log in from home, maybe because I'm doing Firecall, maybe I've only got access to specific Firecall accounts or specific processes. So it allows you to be able to narrow down the scope of what they're doing and obviously limit the impact, of what any potential breach does. Now, as I mentioned, as well as operating systems, we can launch applications, we can play credentials in. So in this use case, we're managing a vSphere credential, we're logging the user into the vSphere console, and we're recording everything. Obviously, that could be a DBMS, it could be a web page, it could be any Windows application whatsoever. Same with Unix and Linux. Any Unix, Linux application, we have the ability to be able to launch, the applications, playing credentials, whether it's through an expect script or whether it's just directly through command line. Ultimately, these are all exec, so that means that when a user exits the menu or whatever you set up, the script, it just closes the session. The user doesn't have any more access. So they're in, they do the job, and then they come out. The other thing as well, which is really important, because obviously it's great to be able to say, yeah, we're actually putting all this stuff in around the control, but it's around, the monitoring and the recording. Now, most of the systems in this place have a default set of reports. I mean, which you have to, because, ultimately, organizations put this type of system in for compliance. So to meet those compliance regulations, your auditors are going to ask you certain things. Who did this on this system at this particular date and time? We got all that. What we have in addition to that are operational reports that allow you to be able to see, how's the system performing? Do I have my rules set up correctly? I mean, do I have a whole bunch of password changes that are actually being set up to execute on a particular day, that maybe I can actually flatten the line. I mean, again, good example, maybe somebody set up 10,000 systems to all change their password on the first day of every month. Well, guess what happens on the first day of every month? You've got 10,000 password changes to process at once. Now, right, you can do that. I mean, that the system will queue them up. I mean, you can have multiple appliances to scale out, but in a small environment, or an environment where you maybe don't have a lot of appliances, that might be something that obviously puts the system under a bit of pressure. So this allows you to be able to monitor not just what's happened, but also what's about to happen. I can look at my rule usage. I can look at my system usage, my users. What are they doing? I mean, how am I? I can go in. I can actually scan all of my systems, and I can take a look at all the services. How many Windows services do I have? What type of accounts are starting those Windows services? Is somebody using a proper service account, or somebody actually just set up, with their Active Directory account because he couldn't be bothered to go off to IT and actually get a newer service account provision? So, as I say, it allows you to go to look at that. Now, one of my favorite reports is something we call the password age report, because this is your low-hanging fruit. Just by going out, scanning your environment without changing a single password, you can now see where all of your administrator accounts are, when the password was last changed, when was it last logged onto. Are these backdoor accounts, that maybe somebody's created? Are they, accounts where maybe somebody's had a vendor in, they've done a POC, they set up a privileged account, they've uninstalled the software, but they've forgotten to remove the account. The important thing is, anything with an account that's privileged is a potential attack vector. If it's not something that's going to be used, get rid of it. Get rid of those vectors. I mean, clear out all of those windows of opportunity for a would-be hacker. So that's why I love the password age report, because it gives a complete analysis of your environment so you can look for all of those particular issues. We also have built-in threat analytics, and again, by the way, all of this is included with the product, so you don't have to pay extra. These aren't extra modules. This is all in there. We allow you to be able to analyze usage. What are the anomalous events? Very often I expect a user to interact with these particular systems and these particular accounts over a period of time. Oh, by the way, they've just actually gone into a system they don't normally access. They're running an application they don't normally access. Oh, they happen to come in from an IP address that they don't normally come from. These are all things that tend to bubble up that threat level. So we're not trying to be a SIM. There's plenty of great SIMs out there, and we integrate with all of them. We send all of our events directly to the SIM, but what we allow you to be able to do is correlate the data between our own products. So password safe, PowerBroker Unix Linux, which is our least privileged for Unix Linux. We've got PowerBroker Windows, which does least privilege for Mac, Windows Server, Windows Desktop, and of course our vulnerability product. So this allows you to tie that information together and look at things in context. So, to summarize, I mean, obviously the biggest thing really, is around the fact that we scan things and we can do things adaptively. You know, things aren't cast in stone, things change. So sometimes you have to look at heuristics, you have to look at patterns of events to determine, am I going to let a user access this system? We also, you know, through our scanning, we're pulling back a lot of metadata, and we can actually dynamically build permission sets. Somebody installs, you know, SQL Server on a box. Well, you know what, or, you know, you can now automatically onboard that, have an email notification, you can start managing the SA account, you know, change your password even without anybody doing anything else. We do that all through our discovery and our automation process. The other thing that's important is we don't charge for all of these extra features. I mean, one of the sort of key things as a product manager that I'm sort of very cognizant of is obviously, you know, we're in a company, we have to obviously make a profit, but at the same time, if I deliver a product that's only half a solution, that potentially a lot of customers may not buy, you know, the important bits, I'm doing them a disservice. So, you know, to me, session management and reporting are critical aspects that need to be added to a product. You can't have password management without session management, in my opinion. You know, so even like with this live session monitoring, so said, this is included, no additional cost. So it's not just us. I mean, the analysts love us as well. You know, Forrester did, you know, a big analysis, actually, a 3-month process of many vendors. And as you can see, we actually came out on top, which is great. You know, so it's a great privilege. And certainly, you know, the rest of the analysts agree. You know, we actually really do have a product that is not only just scalable, you know, and secure, but it's also something that's easy to use. And that's actually something I want to just, you know, kind of show you here, because in all my years in this space, one of the very big issues is it's great to say, okay, yeah, I mean, someone comes to me, an exec comes to me and says, I need to buy a product, I got to fix this gap, we got a compliance issue. Great, okay, I do the, you know, RFI, I send it out, I get my vendors in, I narrow it down to 2 vendors, we do a POC, we choose the vendor. Smiles all around, great, okay, perfect. Now we start to use it. The admins are saying, well, hang on a sec, this is, you know, completely different. This is changing the way that I work. I don't want to use it. What you tend to find with PAM is, and especially with, you know, in the admin world, people are very protective of their systems. You know, they become that's their family. You know, I mean, they watch them grow up, they install software, they watch them evolve, you know, they add systems in. And, you know, anything that sort of puts you between you and your family is potentially perceived as a threat. So what we've done is actually build a way that makes it very, very unobtrusive to access. So, you know, yeah, we got a standard web interface, so I can go in and, you know, say, yeah, give me access to the system. We've also got a thing called Direct Connect. So I could basically just use MOBA Xterm, PuTTY, Reflection, Terraterm, whatever SSH system I want. That's now logging me on. And as you can see, you know, admin 01, I'm actually connected to this account, even though I'm actually logged into the system as, you know, mCanard, you know, in my BT lab. I can do the same thing for RDP. I can open up an RDP session as well. Again, luckily, MOBA External actually supports both, so, you know, makes it great for demoing. But I could use anything. And Remote NG, I could use Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager. I could use Devolutions. It doesn't matter. I mean, I could use any of those tools. Key thing is I'm connected to the resource I need to be able to connect to very, very easily, and using the same methods I'm probably using today. Now, what the security admin gets, the benefit, if we actually log in, sorry, we can't multitask and talk and type, so chances are I'm going to fat finger my password. Oh, no, there we go. Yes, I did. Right, let me just try that again. All right, let's go in. All right, so what I'm able to do now as an administrator is obviously I've got access to, you know, be able to go to all different parts of the system. You know, I can also go in and, you know, request passwords and the like, you know, in the same way as any other user. But what I also have is the ability to be able to go in and actually look at things like live sessions. So, you know, I can look at the active sessions that are running, and I can pull it up. I can see exactly what this user's doing. So, you know, if I go in here, see, you know, someone's running the start menu, they run IE, hit the search window, they basically whatever they're doing, you know, I can see what they're doing. As you can see, everything's being monitored. If they're doing something nefarious, I can lock what they're doing. I can actually, you know, halt them in their tracks. doesn't kill the connection or whatever, and I can do the same for SSH. This allows me to be able to say, okay, well, let's actually figure out what's going on. Yep, okay, what you're doing is legitimate. I'll unlock you, and then you can carry on and do what you're doing. So it's putting the tools in that actually helps you meet your compliance requirements, but at the same time, it's not obtrusive, obviously to the end user. So with that, what I'm going to do is pass it back over obviously we have a poll that's going on, and Sarah can help with that.
Yeah, I'm going to launch that. Thank you so much, Martin. Hey guys, so we're going to jump into Q&A in just a second, but before I get into that, our last poll of the webinar, would you be interested in engaging with one of our security experts? We'd love to walk you through a more thorough one-on-one demo of either PowerBroker Password Safe or one of our other privilege management solutions, or even one of our vulnerability management solutions. So let us know, select yes, and somebody will be in contact with you. So I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into a couple of questions. Eric, this came in for you. So if you want to jump off mute, and I'll go ahead and queue you up with this question. Do you think it's better or more effective to use longer passwords, or to change your passwords more frequently, or a combo of both?
Yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes. So yes, as many of you are probably familiar with, NIST came out a few months ago with their new components on passwords, where they basically said, make your password really long, and you never have to change it unless it's compromised. Now, in theory, I agree with that, except there's one little problem. The adversary doesn't call you on the phone and tell you when it's compromised, right? So this idea that you somehow magically know when it's compromised, right, I sort of shake my head and laugh. So to me, the whole idea of passwords is you want to have length and character set to make it very difficult for somebody to be able to brute force. Now, we've pretty much saturated the character set component, so we now go with length. So yes, if we want to go with 20, 25, 30 character, and I know most of you are like, are you crazy? No, 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 passphrase. What if I actually typed in, my first son was born at Fairfax Hospital? I'm guessing, but that's probably a 45 character password, easy to remember, easy for me to be able to type in there. So you go now to 20, 30, 40 characters, and now, once again, if you know it's compromised, you change it, but now you can move to 6 months, 9 months. You can get a much longer change interval because it's much, much harder for that adversary to break into it. So yes, I'm a big fan that if you can go long passwords, you can then go ahead and increase that length, but you still want to have some change interval. You can just make it a little longer.
This question might be for both of you, but what are your feelings on two-factor authentication?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, any additional factor authentication is necessary, because just having one thing that you present isn't really enough. Sometimes, you need to present something that you have and something that you know. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of mandatory in my case. I mean, obviously, it can live in, or be presented in many different things, smart cards, tokens, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I would sort of agree with that. I like it. I love it. I want some more of it. Two-factor is great. The problem is it's getting better with texting and number to cell phones and other factors, but you always have that token issue and that cost component of layering that into the solution. But yes, if you can layer in a two-factor, that is much better, because basically it's password on steroids. Two-factor is saying you still have your password, but now we're going to give an extra component that's always changing, always altering, to make it that much harder for the adversary.
Martin, can you use two-factor authentication with Password Safe?
Absolutely. Yeah. Fully supports two-factor, smart card token, all of those additional factor technologies.
And Martin even told me it even supports three-factor authentication too. That's how good the product is.
Absolutely.
That was a joke that nobody laughed at. Okay, excellent. That's why I don't do comedy on the side. So.
The audience is laughing, I'm sure of it. We just can't hear them. Okay, guys, so with that brilliant joke from Eric, I'm going to wrap this up. A reminder that you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. It will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so be on the lookout for that follow-up. And a big thanks again to our experts today. You guys rocked it. And everybody who attended live, thanks for all your questions and for being here today. We will see you at the next one. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.